Everyone, and thanks very much for joining us tonight for our Coach to Coach webinar, Learning Better, with special guest presenter Mark Scott. Just a quick introduction. Myself, Gary Middleton, Football Development Officer at Northumberland FA. We also have Helen Beales, our Marketing Communications Officer, overseeing any questions that come through on the chat. Just before we get onto the presentation tonight, this is our 14th Coach to Coach coach development webinar over the last year. But it's nice to hopefully see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and looking forward to some face-to-face delivery. And our first Coach to Coach event will be in July, which will be face-to-face at the Expo Northeast, which is at Kingston Park, where the Falcons play. Got a fantastic lineup there of presenters: Pete Sturgis, Paul McGuinness, Paul Holder, Graham Carrick. So please look out on our media platforms for tickets. The tickets are free, and it's going to be a fantastic conference. Helen will put something on the chat, but definitely one not to miss. And as we say, that'll be our first face-to-face Coach to Coach conference, basically. Back to tonight. Mark's made a few of the slides interactive, so please join the discussion throughout the chat and put in your comments and your feedback, please, as and when Mark comes to them. There'll be opportunities throughout the presentation for to ask questions, again, if we put them through the chat function. Please, as I've mentioned already, switch off cameras and mute microphones. Obviously, this enables a better quality presentation. The webinar will be recorded and put on the website at a later date. Okay, down to Mark. Mark is a learning designer at UK Coaching. And Mark, I think probably over to you for your sort of introduce yourself and your experiences and what you've done in the game and in coaching over the last few years since I've known you, basically.
Thanks, Gary. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Thanks for the introduction, Gary. Yeah, obviously we've coached together as well a little bit at South Shields. So yeah, my background is in football, basically. So from grassroots level through to coaching academy football, different levels. Currently doing a little bit at Spennymoor Town in the youth setup at the moment as well. I've also been FA tutor, affiliate tutor mainly in Durham, but also Northumberland as well a little bit. We're covering and filling in over the years, and doing a little bit of the coach mentor program, which again with some clubs in Northumberland FA as well. So yeah, have been around the county a little bit in terms of football. But yeah, the day job, I work at UK Coaching, which we're a national organisation, and basically we do coach learning. I'm just chatting before that we probably do the how to coach stuff, so the kind of generic coaching, how to be a coach and how to go about your coaching, part of it. But we also work very closely with national governing bodies and many other different types of partners in collaboration to help them with their learning products as well as our own as well. So my role at UK Coaching is as Gary said, as a learning designer. So I get involved in, to be honest, all sorts that goes on in our place. So anything from designing events through to writing articles for website, which a lot of the stuff that you'll hear tonight, I produce articles, podcasts, videos, etc. as well as down to qualifications, workshops, the whole lot really. So my kind of passion is around learning, and that's why we thought it'd be a good session tonight, just to think about how we learn and how we try and get better as coaches, and hopefully along the way there might be some tips about how you could do any of that a little bit better, and do your personal learning a little bit better. So you can see with the game plan on the right there, we've got 3 parts lined up. So there's a little bit of content that I'll go through. So there's our ways of learning model. We'll go through that in the first bit. We'll talk a little bit about memory and how that's important for learning as well. And then reflection, so how we go about doing reflection as well. Just an aside to all of this as well, and so this is all going to be about how do we do our personal learning. So as a coach, how do I learn? How do I get better? But actually, there's a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about tonight, and particularly when we get into the memory stuff, that transfers. So obviously, the people that we coach are also learning, and coaching is basically getting people to learn better as well. So there's a lot of transferable knowledge here that hopefully you'll be able to join the dots and see how it links to potentially how you design your coaching practice as well. So we'll get going and straight into it. Gary kind of lined this up nicely for me. It would be great to just see in the chat box, if you wouldn't mind just popping in the chat box. So you've joined tonight with obviously the title and knowing that this is about how do we learn and how do we get better as a coach, how do you do your personal learning, that sort of stuff. So just thinking as a coach, why is it important that we learn and improve and try and get better? So it'd be just great to see any answers that people have. Of course, no wrong answers at all, just people's thoughts. It would be really good to see. And I think, Gary, you're going to hopefully relay anything that pops in, because I can't see.
Yeah.
Give it a minute or so. I'm sure people are typing away.
A few coming through here now. To help engage better with our players.
Great.
Some more coming through. One I wrote down, Mark, was develop our own knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Develop our knowledge, yeah. So we can get better ourselves, to become an enabler of development for the players.
Nice one, like that. I think
and not a blocker, Mark. Sorry, I didn't get all that. To become an enabler of development for the players and not a blocker.
All right. Yeah.
From Jonathan. Improve our players, from Dave.
I think already that it's interesting for me, just reflecting on some of those answers that are coming through. There's almost 2 bits to it. So there's the immediate, that we as coaches can get better, to improve, where we're talking about improving knowledge, things like that. But then the second part to that, and maybe the reason behind it, is that we obviously then want to, if we become a better coach by having that knowledge, that means I can coach better. So that has a direct impact on the participants and people taking part. And
great one come through. Yeah, just another one, Mark, from Andy. Why a coach guides the learning of the individuals to reach their potential. In order to do this, you must firstly know where the destination is. Secondly, understand how to guide someone to solve problems and remove barriers to learning.
That's a super well thought out answer, I think. Absolutely, and totally agree with all of that. That's great. It's really good to get people thinking, and that's why I wanted to start with a question to get you thinking, and hope maybe some of those answers will keep filtering through, and that's great. But the most important bit, and we'll do this a couple of times throughout tonight. We'll pause a little bit and self-reflect a little bit. And again, if people want to share answers in the chat box, I think that's a great thing to do as well. We can all learn from all of each other's answers. So please do share if you want to. But again, you might want to kind of keep it to yourself. But I think that the key point is that you're starting to think about it. So we're thinking of this as actually this is an important thing, as it's almost part of my role or responsibility as a coach, that I should be trying to improve myself, to try to get better, so that I can improve my practice, and therefore the people who I coach also get a better experience, basically, from what I'm giving them. So at this point, we'll talk about what we're going to go through, and I've already flagged up the 3 topics that we're going to discuss and go through. But I'd never like to say that you're going to learn them, because I think learning is a process, not an event. So I think it might take a bit more thought and reflection, the things that we've just started to talk about there, and going away and thinking about it and putting it into your own context and things like that. So, but what I'm going to start with is some of the great work that a researcher called Anna Stotter has done around coach learning. And Anna's research tells us, she talks about a coach's biography. So your biography is basically everything that you bring into the table, your past experiences. So your experiences, your beliefs, the practices that you've been involved in, the things that you've done in the past, maybe as a player, maybe as a coach, maybe as a teacher, maybe as a parent. What do you bring to the table through all of the experiences that you've had in the past? And so what I'm aware of, and maybe I think it's also useful for you to be potentially like self-aware of this stuff, is that hopefully you will adopt some stuff which is Anna's word for that. Actually, you'll go, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna try that. That suits me. Great. I'm gonna go and give that a go, or I'm gonna go and look into that some more, type of thing. You'll probably reject some stuff and go, what the hell are you talking about, Mark? That's a load of rubbish. I don't agree with that. And again, that's like cool by me, because this is, I'm not the oracle. It's just we're gonna try and talk about some of this stuff and how we can do things. You don't have to necessarily agree with it, but be aware potentially that maybe you have some biases based on your biography and where you've come from and your current beliefs, and things that maybe other people have told you that will maybe impact that. So sometimes it's good to question your own rejection of those sort of things. And also that you might actually adapt some stuff as well. So you might hear some things where you go, oh, I'm not sure about that. But actually later down the line, or you think that could actually maybe work for me if I thought about it, as I've said before, like I go away and change it, adapt it into something that's more contextually relevant for me. And I always think of when I think of this stuff, it might be actually that like some different practices, or cross sport, or from different age groups. So I coach a different age group, that doesn't work for me. Those sorts of things that I think where we maybe need to adapt it. So there's just something to potentially be aware of. What I would like you to think about, and I think, like I said before, I think thinking is an underrated thing. It's what we think about, we learn in the end. Or certainly you're not going to learn it if you don't think about it. So here's like 3 main things that I would like you to think about as we go through. So that question of what is learning, I mean, I haven't got an answer for that. I'm working learning, and I don't know the exact answer for what that exactly is. I think that's a great question to throw around, and again, that's okay. I think to have that uncertainty there. How does learning happen is another one to really consider, and like I said before about transferring that into how does it happen for the people you coach as well is a useful question to throw around. We're going to get into next about what different ways can I do my learning. So we're all on a webinar tonight. We've all got together to listen mainly, but also hopefully to, like I said before, some stuff that we can share through the chat box and things like that. So there's some ways that you can do your learning. And then the last bit we'll talk about how can you reflect better. All right, so when we come to the reflection stuff, and we've already done that. We've already started to do some reflection, thinking about some of those questions, hopefully. And again, so if you can kind of have those in the back of your mind as we go through this, and potentially wrestle through some of those questions as we go through the session, that'd be really useful, I think. So we're going to start with this question about how do you do your learning, and I think that, you know, I quite like this. I think it's that traditionally we've kind of focused more on formal training, if you like, courses that we go on, and then, you know, you go on a course, and then the magic is supposed to happen somewhere, and then we become really good suddenly, right? And as I think, as I've already said, you know, I think that's not really how learning works. It's not an event. It's not a one-off thing. It's not like something where you can click your fingers and just like go on look at on a webinar or a YouTube video or whatever it might be, and then suddenly you know some stuff inside out. We need to think about it in some different ways. So this is almost a little bit of a journey of something that I went on at work, to develop a model which is around the different ways that we learn. Some of you may have come across the 70-20-10 principle in the past. That it's something that many workplaces adhere to in terms of like personal development, learning and development within work. And what the 70-20-10 says is that 10% of formal that we've already talked about, those courses, the training that you do, that's about 10%. But then there's some social learning, so learning through others, things like mentoring, that sort of thing, within a workplace environment. How it tends to be like workplace coaching, those sorts of things. So that's about 20%, and then. So again, thinking of this is work related. So it's looking at adults and how adults learn within their work practice mainly. They talks about that actually 70% that we learn through our experiences. So on the job, actually doing it, having a go, and I'm sure a lot of us can kind of relate to this as a general principle. There's and I think it's as principles, I think it's a good concept, but there was some things about it, without getting into the detail, that I didn't like about it. So as one example, it was done with executive leaders who could get coaching, if you like, one-to-one stuff. But secondly, I never like putting numbers on things. So I think, if we take that we do a lot of our learning is through experience, then that's still a good principle. But to say it's 70%, I think, it's not quite right for me to put those numbers on. So we went through a process, and what I ended up coming up with was a version of that kind of builds in those three things and a few other bits along the way that just talk about that actually we have these different ways of learning. So you can see there that we've got discover, experience, connect, guided, and apply is the one that's kind of in the middle that knits it all together. So I'm basically going to talk you through these five and talk about some examples as how you might do these different ways. So the first one, which we've touched on already a little bit, is the guided. So the guided is that formal learning where you might go on a course, you might be doing your qualification. So I'm sure lots of you have done FA qualifications. So where it's more structured, you probably have an expert who's leading it. There's like a scheme of work to follow, or whatever we want to call that. We know the things that we need to cover or learn as we go through that, and you might have some form of assessment within that says you need to be able to do these things in order to meet that qualification, as an example. But again, things like tonight, where if you think of the things I've just said, that yeah, I've got some stuff that I want to deliver. I'm here as that person to tell you about it. So I'm guiding the conversation tonight and telling you what I know, if you like, and we'll have some discussion around it. But yeah, so workshops, e-learning courses that you do, those sorts of things are examples of what I call guided way of learning. So you can see the other one, at the icons on the right hand side there. So the one at the bottom is something that I'm pretty much looking forward to having again. And it's funny that actually Gary's presented that there at the start about the expo event, which sounds brilliant. But so, conferences. So our coaching conference, that we have a national coaching conference and also tend to run like regional events. We just didn't run our research conference that's normally in February. We did that online. But I'm certainly looking forward to getting back to having conferences, meetups, whatever we want to call them, that happen face to face, because let's face it, I think we've all certainly been missing that part of it. So again, a conference, you can probably already see that conference, as an example, might go into some of the other ways. And so there's overlap and grey areas, of course, in some of these. But I think conference is an example of where you might be guided on your learning. So the next one is discover. So discover is where you go about learning it yourself. So you go and find out for yourself. So it's probably stuff that you need. So stuff that I need to learn in order to do what I need to do, if you like. So I'm sure that we've all Googled something within the, I was going to say 24 hours, probably within the last hour. But Google is a good example of that. Actually, we've got access to all sorts of stuff if we want to. And the same with YouTube, I guess, in that example, that actually if I need to know how to do something, or find out about what something is, that sprung to mind, I can quickly get on there and read something about it, or watch a YouTube video about that thing. So again, these things are ways that I can actually do my learning, and more modern ways, I guess. But I'm sure we've all done something like that, where you've gone and found it out basically at your fingertips. It's available. And similarly with like a podcast, which again, I know that Gary's doing podcasts, which is great as well. And I think it's a different way of learning that's becoming really, really popular. And obviously because of the access and being able to use them in the car or on your iPod or whatever it might be. So another different way of accessing some like great discussion, and access to experts from kind of all around the world. Call me old-fashioned, but I like books as well. So like reading paper books as well, not just looking at a screen. So you might be able to see some. I've got my bookcase over there. It's not showing off, but I actually like to read physical books, and I think that's a useful thing. And I think reading as a form of learning is actually also underrated a little bit. I think if there's an easy, relatively cheap way that you can really learn some good stuff. And again, I think within all of this, we need to think about, especially with like Google and YouTube, the quality control part of it. So there's good stuff out there, but there's also bad stuff out there. So I think sometimes the reading, whether it be books, or if you're more into like blogs, those sorts of things, that's also a really good way to learn. So you can see that this is similar to what we talked about before. So the experience is that actually I learn it through my experiences, by having a go, by doing it. So on the job, if you like. So in our instance that we're talking about tonight, actually coaching. Now, I would argue that the experience of coaching is more than just the physical. I'm out there on the grass delivering some stuff with some players, which is of course part of it. So having a go at things, putting it into practice, picking up ideas wherever I've got it from, but whether I've thought about it or I've nicked it from someone. But I think it's important here to say that if you are gonna use experiential learning, so you've got to try stuff. So let's be brave enough to try it. If I'm going to learn through my coaching practice and having a go at things, I think you've got to be confident enough, I suppose, to have a go and fail, I guess, like try things out. All right, it might not look great, it might not work the first time, but it's a good way. It's a good way to learn, is actually just by trying some things out when you're coaching. But I would argue that the two above and below that are, so planning, I think, is a really important process to go through as a coach as well. So I think we can learn through our planning. So thinking up ideas. Now, when I'm saying planning, it's like coming up with ideas. So linked to what we just said, all right, can I come up with some new ideas as to things that I can try? All right, so again, I can learn through my planning process. And if I then reflect on that planning process, which is the last part of it, that might help as well as to whether I plan things well for that session. Could I tweak it? Could I amend it? Could I change it? That sort of thing. And I think with the reflection, the review thing, I think that's an important part for me. So I think we all as coaches are guilty of probably not spending enough time to learn from what we do, i.e. reviewing it, reflecting upon it. So can we put some time aside to just actually do that? It might be, a good place for me is always in the car. All right, so I tend to try to do that thinking in the car. For me, it's not stuff that always needs to be written down. All right, it's the thinking is the most important part of all of this for me. So I do my thinking in the car. All right, but again, chatting it through with others, those sorts of things, in the informal conversation with your fellow coach. All right, going over it, reviewing it. All right, but maybe putting some time in that we say, actually, we're not just going to do that in the car park for 5 minutes. It's like, are we going to set that up a little bit more structured, that actually we're going to try and learn from our reviewing of things. The next one is connect. So this is the social learning part, and I'm a big fan of social learning. So tonight is probably more of a guided session from me, but normally I would like to get loads of interaction. I'm talking about the face-to-face stuff more. I think that's where it really comes in. I think we can do the connect and social bit online, and we've actually done some research into that with a little project I've done around communities of practice. But I think it really, the magic really happens when we get together, doesn't it? And just that, the coffee conversation type of thing. So learning from others, learning with others, throwing ideas around, trying things out in conversations, giving each other feedback, those sorts of things. So I'm sure you've got, or have you really thought about who you've got? I'm sure you've got people who you can learn from. And that here's a start with this. This group that we've got here, people coming together on if we do that on a regular basis, then that might be something that leads to relationships where you can learn from people. Again, you've got people you coach with. Have you thought outside of that? So have you got other people? So if you look at that, like that network there on the right hand side, you think you've got your immediate people, but who else have you got? And actually are there people who, the people who do they know people who you could learn from? Could they introduce you? So could they refer you and introduce you to someone who actually might be really good for you to learn from? You might want to go and observe them, or you might want to just have a chat with them, have a coffee, those sorts of things. So I think it's really useful for you to think about that, but go out of your way to do that as well. So it's something that I think so if I reflect as personally, it's not something that I don't like to be pushy and do that sort of thing, but it's something that I've, over the past few years, as I've kind of got into this research around social learning, I'm trying to do that myself at the moment. Just connect with other different people from different sports, as an example, people from outside of sport, but who could who we could really learn from, who are either leaders, or they're again teachers, things like that, where I think education research for the stuff that I'm talking about tonight is really valuable to learn from people who are in that sort of field. So I'm sure that there are people out there who are untapped at the moment, or maybe you don't make best use of them, if that makes sense. So again, this doesn't have to be a formal thing. It can be that coffee conversation. It can be the chat in the car park. That's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And I've had many a chat in many a car park for hours, never mind minutes, which I've learned from, certainly with other coaches. So All those sorts of things are really useful in terms of the social learning. So the last one is apply, and that one knits it all together in the middle. So I always think that we can do all that. We can learn. We can go and discover some stuff. You can listen to me tonight. You can have a chat with your mate in the car park or with a cup of coffee. All right. But really, you need to apply it in order to do some real learning. So we're talking about that process, not event stuff. And so again, like, think about how can you apply it. So can you reflect upon that stuff? So I'm trying to get you to think about reflection tonight. So I'm hoping that you'll go in and think about some of this stuff. Think about it, all right? And that is reflecting, and that is learning, as we'll talk about later. Think about how it applies to you in your role, like coaching your age group, as I mentioned before. Those sorts of things. Can you take it from someone else? So again, we're social beings. We nick stuff, right? So you go and watch someone, you see a session or you see something on YouTube, and you think, actually, that's great, but would it work for me? Question that. Would it work for me as a coach? Would I be able to deliver that? Would my players be able to cope with that? But well, maybe not. But actually, if I adapt it, if I change it in this way, maybe they could. So maybe I can nick that and adapt it and change it. So through that thinking and applying what you've actually gone and found out, we're actually doing some real proper learning. And again, just might have to adapt it. So that adapting, making it fit to you is a really useful tool. So them are 5 ways of learning. And what I would love you to think about. So I'm gonna pause for a minute or two here to let you, first of all, reflect, as we've talked about. So have a think about. And hopefully you may be thinking about, as we went through, I'm hoping that people were thinking, yeah, I do that, or I don't do that. That might be something that I could do more, or I could do better. So they're the kind of 2 questions I want you to think about. So what's your default, if you like? I bet you probably have something where you go, actually, yeah, I normally do this. But also, therefore, have you got anything that stood out there as maybe a different way that you thought, I could try and do that? Or like I was saying before, I'm trying to build my network and connect with some different people from different ways of life in different fields that I can learn from. So you might think of something like that where you're going, yeah, I'm gonna go out and try to do this. So I'm going to shut up for a minute and let you have a think, scribble down, pop in the chat box only if you want to. I'll I'll pick it up in a minute or two's time and let you have a think about all of that.
Mark, can I just say there while people's having a think and possibly putting some stuff down in the chat, from my experience, my learning has always been through doing. So that experience of delivering something and learning from what went well and what didn't go so well, and what went well, how would we make it better for the following week, or if it didn't go so well, how can we adapt that to improve that for the players? And I think from, you can go on as many courses as you want and do this type of learning, but getting on the pitch or getting out on the court, whatever sport we're coaching, and actually practicing putting out there what you want to do with the players and how does it work, because that comes into a question from Gavin that's put in the chat. Biggest problem I experience is to try to work out a complete session for a night, but a question whether the correct drills are being used, mostly due to overexposure of sessions available research online.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll deal with Gavin's question, which is a great one actually, and I referred a little bit to that already, didn't I? I think it links to your point. So I think that the key bit is you've got to just get out there and coach, and that get as many hours in as you can actually doing your coaching, and again, like thinking about, I know if we're working in pairs or whatever, how much do you actually get involved to practice the things that you want to try? So it's all good and well if we're talking about reflecting and doing this, that and the other, but if we're not actually delivering much or trying those things out, then I don't think that's much good. So I think it is a massive key for me to actually get out there and do the coaching. The other stuff around it is the bit that's then going to make a difference. But you can't do that. You can't do the reflection like you were saying and thinking about how can I make that better and stuff without actually having gone through it. If you've only seen something, I don't think you can get that experience, because the experience of being in there and being in charge and doing, communicating and seeing how players reacted and stuff like that, you can only get that by doing it. So I think both of them points together are really valuable. Yeah.
And again, just another one on my experience, that the connection part of that little graph. So some of the coaches on the call tonight might not have be so lucky and have someone that they can bounce stuff off, but I think there's a real importance to that. In my experience, and I suppose yours as well, I've been lucky enough to work and pair up with some really top coaches over the last 20 years, you included, Mark, Neil Winskill, and I think that's really important to share ideas and bounce things off. And before we've started, do you think this will work? This is what I had planned. And then that comes around to the reflection at the end. That was great, or that didn't work so well. I will not use that again because of that reason. So I think that connection's really good as part of your reflection process, if you're lucky enough to have that within your clubs, really, and teams.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's maybe worth considering. Like I appreciate that, some people might be out there coaching by themselves, and like you said, maybe don't have access to that. But even then, just having a phone call or a chat with someone who might just be able to offer you some maybe advice, but even just listen. Again, so it's something that I think sometimes it's you having the conversation and getting things out and going through it with someone who maybe doesn't get coaching or get football. So if you've got someone who you can just chat to about it, who might just ask you a question or might give you a point. Like I said before, it might be something related to their job or a different kind of relationship. Sometimes I think there are lots of people out there who've got good skills to be able to kind of have a conversation or support people within how they learn. So again, just trying out, or just saying, can I just run this past you? I'm going to try this. What do you think? Do you think that would work? Those sorts of things. I think the connection part is really, really useful. But maybe we need to think. What I was saying before is, do we need to think outside the box as to the types of people that we can try to connect with? Great stuff, and thanks for the questions. Are great. I love the questions, so keep them coming if you've got any. We've had the pit stop there. That was the pit stop. So we're going to go into part two. We'll just talk a little bit about memory, and if we want to understand learning, I think we need to try to understand a little bit about how memory works. So a guy called Dan Willingham, who this is his model. It's a fairly basic model of memory. We could get super complicated here underneath all of this, but Willingham, who's a cognitive psychologist, talks about that understanding is memory in disguise. And I think I mentioned before that if we need to think about things if we're going to learn them. But also we need to have that understanding of it. So how do we do that, and how does our brain work to help us do this stuff? So just going to highlight three things really, so that we go through on this model. So from attention, to where we pay attention to things from the environment, essentially. Then we've got the working memory, as it's called. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about long-term memory as well. So two different types of memory. So attention, first of all, is I think the more I'm looking into all of this stuff, I think attention is really, really, really important. Actually, it's something that is going to determine whether you can do anything with the stuff that you're taking in, because attention is essentially what we're focusing on. So what you're focusing on right now, I'm hoping it's the words that are coming out of my mouth. It might be the model on the screen. That would be brilliant. But linked to what I said before about, you know, do you reject stuff? Do you actually just not even hear some stuff? Is also maybe part of what Anna Stotter talks about in terms of what you're going to pick up from sessions. So you might actually not have had your tea and you're thinking, oh, I'm starving, I can't wait for him to shut up, and so I can go away for my tea. Or I think there's a match on later. So you might be thinking about that, or whatever it might be. So if you weren't thinking about that, you probably are now, because I've now provoked your attention towards those things. So again, there's something that can happen. You know, the old don't think about a pink elephant thing, and that is the thing that comes into your mind, that idea. So attention's really important, and just to give us a brief explanation of how we do attention in our brain. So, and probably due to evolution and all that kind of stuff, and you know, staying alive basically in the olden days and running away from saber-toothed tigers and stuff, we're good at selective attention. So we're good at focusing on one thing at a time. So if you are listening to my voice, you could probably do quite a good job of listening to that. But if you are trying to do that whilst look at your phone and answer a text at the same time, you might be struggling. Okay, because actually multitasking, as an example, is a myth. All right, so those who say that women are better at multitasking than men, as an example, that's wrong, because we all can't multitask. It's something that the brain can't do. So we're good at focusing on one thing at a time. We're not good at focusing on basically more than one thing at a time. Interestingly, just a little aside to that, if you are looking at the model on the screen and listening to my voice, we can do that, because something called dual coding, which I'm not going to talk about tonight, means that actually we have two channels in the brain that can focus on words and pictures at the same time. So there's something else that's another way that we can actually learn better, is to use pictures and words at the same time. So there's a little aside. But think about, so this links to distraction. So how much do we get distracted? So I mentioned like a text, the phone thing, thinking about other stuff. How do we get distracted? Music, those sorts of things, all being shown basically. I've seen it's all over Twitter at the moment about phones in schools. All right, and it's like basically all the research says don't have phones anywhere near classrooms, because people get distracted. We can't focus on doing work and thinking about what's on my phone. Then we go to what's called working memory. So our working memory is where we send the things that we're paying attention to. So we send them there to be processed, to be thought about. So it's working because that's where it all happens. This is where the magic happens, if you like. This is where all the thinking happens. It's the stuff that you're thinking about right now. So we're able to take in the things from the environment, and we're able to start to think about them. Now the other bit which links into the model here, so you can see how working memory is linked to long-term memory. I can also bring things that I've got stored in my brain, in my long-term memory, into the working memory as well. So you might be thinking about, if you already know some of this stuff, you might have done this in A-level psychology or whatever it might have been. All right, you're thinking, yeah, actually, I know this, I remember this. And so you're thinking about how you learned that, or the models that you used. It might have been a slightly different model to this one. So you can bring that into your working memory and think about that at the moment as well. Now, basically, there's been all sorts of research about how much stuff can we hold in our working memory then. And the consensus in the past used to be something like 7-ish. But again, that's kind of been revised more to about four bits of information. But what we are good at is something called chunking. So we can chunk things together. So if you can learn patterns and things like that. So in the old days, we used to learn phone numbers in patterns, didn't we? Learn it in 2 groups of 3 numbers, or whatever it might be. So that's called chunking. But we can only hang on to about 4 bits of information at any one time. And this is important because, again, if we now think about how you coach your players, that if you think players, when we're giving instructions, all right, if you're giving them any more than a couple of bits of information, that's gone probably. You know, they've forgotten it. And we call this cognitive overload. So we can really overload the memory, the brain, with too much information. So we've got to think about keeping things concise, chunking it down, keeping it really clear, not talking about too much, certainly all at once, or outsourcing it, as it's called, by using. So that's why I've got the model on the screen. Again, hopefully you could, if you've forgotten what working memory is called, you can look on the screen and look at that it's called working memory because it says it there. So we can use things like that, using notes, I don't know if you can see my whiteboard over there, but like I use my whiteboard all the time. So again, that's something I know that coaches use as well. Like you can use things like that to give prompts and cues to people. So you can use it in all sorts of ways to kind of keep things in mind, if you like. The other side of all this is that if we do want to learn it, in inverted commas, and by learning it, basically what we're saying is we want to put it into long-term memory. So if we get it into long-term memory and store it there, that's basically the goal of learning. All right, can we get it there? Because long-term memory can hold it there forever. All right, and the capacity of long-term memory is unlimited, so we can store as much stuff in long-term memory as you can throw it, basically, but you've got to work hard to keep it there. That's the other bit. But you can see that actually, if there's a link there between learning and putting things into long-term memory, and then actually being able to remember them. But in order to do that, hard thinking is needed. So this thing about thinking, we've got to think hard about stuff to get it in there and to keep it in there. Otherwise, you can see the arrows that are pointing down. We're really, really good at forgetting, and we'll talk about that in a second. But like we forget things that are in the working memory, so you might have forgot what I'm just been talking about there. But you might also forget if we never revisit things that I might have stored at one point, because you did do it in A-level psychology however many years ago. You might have forgotten that because you haven't done it for 10 years. Okay, so that we can forget things in some different ways as well. So the long-term memory is that's our store. That's where we store things. You can see the connections there coming off in the schema or the brain there. And this is like your long-term memory is a bit like a forest. So things grow and things fade away, like I said. So we might be learning new things all the time, and they're growing, and we're kind of putting them together, piecing them together, those connections that you can see. But some of those connections might be fading away because we haven't revisited them often enough, or for many years in some cases, and we might then start to forget. And in this way, prior knowledge is really important. So we need to know something in order to then attach new information to that information. So sometimes it's good to start with basics. So again, it's no good me starting to talk about some of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute without telling you this stuff. So this is why I'm talking about memory, because I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that we can use this information that kind of build on the way that the brain works, how to show how we can learn better. But in order to do that, you kind of need to know a little bit that actually this is how the brain works. So I mentioned forgetting. And is forgetting a friend or foe? Well, it's probably both. Like, so we basically, like I said there, we forget really quickly and really well. So the brain is, and it's linked to all that stuff, right? What I just need to deal with what's going on right now. So we're actually really good at forgetting. So the stuff I talked about at the start of the session, you're already starting to forget it. And again, once you go away from this session tonight, you can see as that goes down. Again, as you know, I don't like putting figures on things particularly, but basically more than half you'll have forgotten by later on tonight. And that's just a natural process. We almost need to accept this, but it's something that we can actually use as our friend as well in learning. So that's something that we're going to talk about now. It's linked to something that a guy called Robert Bjork talks about, which is desirable difficulty. So desirable difficulty is basically that I said before about we need to think hard about things. So if we just do easy things all the time, things that you already know, that you can have a go at that. Yeah, you can be tested on that. I can do that, no problem. That's easy. We're not going to develop and learn better there. So it's a principle that actually I hope I've done this a little bit tonight, and I think I've pitched it a little bit up here. And if you haven't come across some of the stuff I've talked about there with the memory model as an example, that might have been like quite difficult for you to keep up with. But actually that's good. So slightly difficult information is that you need to think about, and you need to stay switched on, you need to focus, you need to not be able to look at your phone as well as listen because it's kind of easy. That's good. That's good for learning. So that level, obviously not completely over your head where you haven't even got a clue what the words mean or what the hell I'm on about, but the slight level of difficulty is actually good. So just bear that in mind as we go into these next two strategies. So I'm going to talk about two strategies that you can use that make forgetting your friend. So we can use the fact that we forget in a positive way to learn better. The first one is spaced practice. And also known as distributed practice, if you've ever come across that. And spaced practice kind of is what it says on the tin a little bit. We space out, we spread out the learning. So rather than doing all of the learning at once, we would spread that out and do it over a number of periods. So we would do it over a number of sessions. And that might mean that rather than doing like an hour all at once, well, I've probably switched off after 15, 20 minutes anyway, and the last 40 minutes was no good to me. I might have been rereading it or going through it more. I might as well just forget that, stop there, and then I'm going to come back to it, though, in a couple of days or a week's time, and I'm going to come back to that information and try and think about it again. Now, if you just link back to that desirable difficulty principle for a sec, all right, that means that you've probably forgotten some of that stuff, and that it's a bit harder for you to remember it and recall it, but that's good. Okay, so like I said, that's good for learning. If you can still struggle and think about and work your way through some of that stuff that you've started to forget, then that's a better way to do it than if I've just done it 1 minute ago and I can get the answer easily. So actually, basically, if we've probably all done it, we've all probably crammed for an exam. So we're basically saying cramming doesn't work. It kind of does actually. If you are just doing it at the last minute, it's not a bad tool. But you certainly won't. The stuff that you learned, you won't remember it in a month. You might remember it tomorrow, but you might not remember it in a month very well. So spaced practice, distributed practice is better for long-term proper learning, where we're talking about it has an impact and I can remember it. It goes into my long-term memory. So this links us into something as well, the difference between performance and learning sometimes. So I can perform really well on one occasion. So if I reread something now 5 times, I feel like I've learned it, and that feels like it's good learning. Whereas actually it's not, because again, in a week's time, I still won't remember it. It's just like at this moment in time, because I did it 5 times in a row, I felt like I knew it because I'd just read it. But if I read the same article 5 times over with days in between, and by the way, sleep is thought to be a part of that as well. So sleep is good for reinforcing some of that. Then actually, my learning over a longer period of time, even though I had to try harder to remember the stuff, is going to be better. So spaced practice is good for longer term learning rather than the immediate performance at that moment in time. The other one I'm going to talk about is retrieval practice. It links into spaced practice a little bit actually. So retrieval practice is basically bringing information into your mind. So it's getting it out of your memory rather than in. So, but bringing it to mind. So if you think about try and bring the last technique that we've just talked about, bring that to mind. Try and think about what that was called. Hopefully you remember that it was spaced practice or distributed practice. So it's that sort of idea. So retrieval practice is basically testing yourself. So rather than looking at the answer, so rather than me going, oh, this was what, remember this, space practice, all right, you didn't have to think about that. There's no desirable difficulty, all right? So rather than me doing that, if I ask you that question, or if you ask yourself that question, all right, so if you can test yourself, bringing information into your mind, then that is, again, it has that desirable difficulty. It makes it more difficult for you to do it at the time, but it actually has a greater impact on how you can learn over that longer period of time. So it has a similar kind of impact in terms of what we were saying, that it's more difficult to do. It feels hard. It doesn't feel, it might feel like you're struggling, but you're better off trying to maybe just scribble down. So if you, when you come back to doing something, rather than just rereading it, again, as an example, we've all done this, I'm sure we've all highlighted our notes or reread an article in order to try and learn it. Forget all that stuff, it doesn't work. So you're better off actually close the book. Right, what can I remember about this? What can I remember about space practice? What can I remember about the four corner model? Whatever it might be. All right, do that. Jot it down yourself, or say it out loud, or tell someone else. Even better, teach someone else. So tell them it. All right, so you've got to explain it to your mate. Is a better way to do it for longer term learning. And if we put them together, this is a good example of how we can, again, make forgetting your friend, interrupt the forgetting, if you like. So you can see the original curve in green here as it goes down. But if after an hour, if we recall it and do some spaced repetition, so I try and remember what I was talking about previously, you can see that actually we start to remember it better. And so that interrupts the curve and we start on this next one down, the blue one. So again, if I then introduce another spaced repetition after, in this case, again, don't worry about like how often do I do it or what time scales, but in this case, it's a day. So a day later, all right, again, I basically top it up. I top my memory up. And if I keep doing that, and I think what you can see is, and again, this is what the research tells us, is that if you do about 3 or 4 repetitions, that's a decent amount, and you're probably going to get it into your long-term memory by then. But you can also see that you're able to leave it for longer. So again, but when you've learned it better, you can leave it for longer. So you might only want to leave it a couple of days the first time, but then you can maybe leave it a week, then you can maybe leave it a month, then you can maybe leave it a couple of months the next time. Just to keep topping yourself up. So I'm going to ask you a question. I know I've already asked you one there. So try and do this off the top of your head if you did make notes at the start of the session. So I mentioned a researcher that talked about biography of coaches learning. She talked, so can you remember her name, first of all? And the second question is, can you remember the 3 things that she talked about that actually within any session that you might do with that information? I'll give you 10 seconds to jot that down. Or say it out loud. Or say it in your head, if you're by yourself and you don't want to sound silly. Okay, so of course it was Anna Stotter, and her research on biography talked about those 3 words of adopt, reject, and adapt and stuff. So there's an example of some stuff that hopefully you were listening to and thinking about at the start of the session, whatever it was, half an hour, 40 minutes ago, that maybe you've forgotten that. I don't know. Well done if you got all of that right. But by trying that, even if you didn't remember, by trying to retrieve it and doing that retrieval practice, that's also been shown that you don't have to get the right answers when you do retrieval practice all the time. The thought process going into that, the effort that you put in, is actually really good for your brain to learn that stuff. So this is our second pit stop, and I think it's just worth just taking a minute there and just reflect on any of that. If there's any questions, do fire them into Gary. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be quiet for a minute and let you either make some notes or take a bit of a brain break before we move on to the last bit. Great stuff. So part 3, we're just going to talk a bit about reflection. And so we have been doing some of that reflection as we've been going through. But just want to talk about why reflection is important, some ways that we can do it, and also some different types a little bit as well. So reflection is about knowing, and when we talk about knowing, I see knowing as different to knowledge. So knowing is based on knowledge, but knowing in action is something that a researcher called Chern talks about, that it's basically your coaching craft. So it's what you know how to do. So it's basically everything in your coaching repertoire, everything you've got in your locker kind of thing, all the tools you've got in your toolkit, all right, that you've either, and that's come from probably all your experience, what you've learned, having a go, reflecting on it, all of that stuff that we kind of put together. What we also know is that your knowing in action is based on the general knowing in practice. So you can see the knowing in practice is the agreed way that things are done within your community. So this could be within your club. So we might have like an agreed way that we do things in our club. It could be within, so again, the FA have DNA and all that kind of stuff. So we have like, this is the way we do things. This is the, this is how we play, all of that kind of stuff that comes into courses and workshops and things. So we agree that as a, as a sport, as football, that here are some ways that we agree that we should do things. And so this is good. This is good because we can learn from best practice. But I think there's a flip side to all of that as well, that sometimes it becomes an echo chamber, that if we only ever hear the same message from everyone all the time, we never get to think outside the box and think of different things. So I'm sure you can think of examples there that actually you might have questioned things in the past. You might have done that reject that we talked about before, or you might not even agree with what I'm saying now. You might think that's a lot of rubbish and we should just all agree. But I see it that there is a flip side here, and we maybe need to at least have a critical eye of when people tell us stuff. So don't take my word for space practice and retrieval practice. Go and have a look at, read about it and find out a bit more about it before you kind of say, yeah, that must be right, I'm going to do that. So the knowing in practice surrounds your own personal, what you know how to do. So there's always known in practice that, yeah, we agree that this is the way that we do coaching. So us at UK Coaching, we have certain principles of great coaching, what great coaching looks like. That might be different to what the FA say. That might be different to what netball say, different sports, for example. But as we build up this model, and it is kind of my own model here, so it's not really referenced, but so that knowing in action, that coaching craft, which is basically what do you know how to do at any moment in time. So when something happens in a coaching session, how are you going to deal with it? Well, you've got to refer to something. So you're going to refer to the stuff that's in that long-term memory. So, right, have I done this before? Yes, I'll try that. Okay, great. Have a go at it then. So then we do the doing. We have a go at something. And then it was a little bit like the cycle that Gary was talking about before. So you do something and then you reflect on it. Did that work? Did it go so well? No, that bit worked, but this bit didn't. All right, I could have done this bit better potentially. So there's your reflecting starting to come in on what you did. By doing that, and by having a go and by having the reflection, that you're also then building that coaching craft, because you're thinking, well, actually, I could have done it this way, a way that I've never tried before. This might have been better. It could have worked better in that instance. So now I remember that adaptation that I've thought about with my reflection because I've had a go at it, and that builds my coaching craft, my knowing in action. So the next time that a similar situation comes along, I'm able to maybe go, right, I'm going to try that other way that I thought could have worked last time. I'm going to give that a go. So, but you've got to give it a go. So I think what I'm saying is that we can talk about reflection, and reflection's great. It was almost the point, I think, from the question that someone asked before, that actually we can do all this stuff, but we also have to do it. We also have to try it out. So we have to do the doing. We have to do the coaching bit in order to then be able to reflect upon it properly, for that to then inform our coaching practice. So in that case, then reflection is learning. So back to our ways of learning, that actually, you know, again, back to the experience part of it, like doing reflection is good learning. Sitting there and thinking about stuff can be really good learning. And so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be paying hundreds of pounds to go on courses and all that kind of stuff. There are some simple ways that you can actually make yourself better. So I'm just going to pause here for a sec. Just spend 30 seconds here, self-reflect. So just have a think about, what things do you reflect about currently? So I'm being a bit flippant with the picture there, you can see, but I think as coaches we do tend to do this a bit, and we tend to like solve problems with our reflection and think, right, you know, what can I've done better is always the question, right? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, by the way, because it is actually a really good thing. But I think we need to think wider about reflection as well. So I think this is something that we almost revert to, and we do that, and we go, right, I'm going to make this practice better by making the area bigger, whatever it might have been. So I'll do that next week. So that's great. I've sorted that one. I'll move on to the next problem to think about. And if we do that, that's fine, and it'll improve the practices and the players will get a better experience. But actually, are you actually improving your coaching? Are you becoming a better coach from doing that? Maybe because you can deliver some better practices, but you know, again, like I think there's some broader stuff that we can get into that would make us a better coach. So I call that the reactive review that's down that left-hand side. So the what went well, even better if, it's pretty surface level. I can, it's about the session or the practice. I'll make the practice better, the session better. So therefore that's good for the players. And like I say, that I'm not dissing that at all, but I just think that that's something that we all do, but we don't really do this other stuff on the other side. So what I would call a reflective conversation. It's more critical, it's more contextual, it's deeper thinking, and it's about coaching. So it's more about issues and real problems and getting into some dilemmas or discussions about things. So like you probably see stuff like that, you know, at the moment about, you know, should we have a games based approach, or should, you know, do drills hold any place in a coaching repertoire? The drills get a bad reputation at the moment, but actually done in the right way, that they can be really useful. But and again, you might not agree with what I've just said there, but that's great, and that's what I'm saying. Let's get into some of those more thoughtful conversations that are about either moral things or issues and ethical things, or your philosophy as a coach. Why are you doing the things you're doing? Do you just do it because that's what you've been told to do, or you've seen others do, or have you thought about it? Have you got good reasons why I'm doing games, why I'm doing different types of practice, why I would use different coaching styles? Those sorts of things, that makes you a better coach. So that might be something that you might think about, the things that you want to reflect about, and that might be more the thing that, you know, you consider in the car, or, you know, you sit down and actually have a think about, and then maybe that leads you to doing some of that discover learning we talked about before. I'm going to go and find out more about this stuff and ask some experts, connect with some experts, so we get into some of those different ways to kind of, you know, get more information about all of this stuff. So at the start of the session, I asked you to think about some of these questions. So that thing around what is learning, and how does that happen, the different ways that you can learn, and how you can reflect better. And obviously we talked about this idea that there's probably some stuff in there, hopefully anyway, that you might adopt, and you might go, yeah, actually, I'm going to either look into that more, or I'm going to try it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to read about it, whatever it might be. again, there might be some stuff that you're thinking, that not for me at this moment in time. Don't know what he's on about there. But there might also be some of that stuff that actually, yeah, I kind of see where he's coming from there, but I don't know enough about it at the moment. I need to find out more, or I need to think about how that works for me in some different ways. So hopefully you can keep thinking about those questions, and that relates back to this bit that I've just talked about on the right hand side. So the reflective conversation bit, it might be that actually you're going to start to think about some of these questions like on a deeper level. That would be great if you did go away and do a bit more of that. So that's all I've got to talk about tonight. Hope some of it, any of it, was of some use. Some contact details there. If anyone wants to get in touch, absolutely, of course, just do so. So thanks for listening. Hope it was useful, and I think we have got a little bit of time if anyone does want to ask any questions or go and enjoy the match, I suppose.
Just quickly, Mark, because I'm conscious of the time as well, exactly with the game being on. But Gavin's just put a great sort of summary into his reflection, really. And I'm very critical of my coaching and think I talk too much. I need to work on less talking and more delivering. I also found out I stop sessions too much. So I now speak to players individually, which means the session does not stop as much and there's more flow. And I think that comes down to his self-reflection there, doesn't it, of the issues that he's had and how to improve them, basically.
And I think that's, first of all, Gavin, I think that's brilliant reflection, and also very brave for you to put that out there publicly. And I think being a bit vulnerable like that is a really good thing as well. I would question you in the spirit of some of the stuff I've just said. I suppose I would make sure that you question all of those things that you've just said, actually. So you think that you talk too much. Have you asked, where else are you getting any of that information from? So are you getting it from, the players telling you that? As someone who you trust and, someone with expertise had a word with you about that. Again, have you referenced that against someone else? So one person's opinion might not actually be the truth. Again, like talking too much, like sometimes we can talk too little as well. So I'm playing devil's advocate on purpose here, but I think you can see where I'm coming from. So doing that sort of asking those sorts of questions and maybe coming at it from a different angle or getting someone else's point of view on it can just really add to those reflections that you're doing, which is absolutely brilliant for a start point. But then you can just go deeper and deeper and get into some of that stuff.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Well, thanks very much for sharing your knowledge around that very insightful topic tonight, basically. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you very much and good night.
Thanks, everyone.